Aha, my hearties, I think I might have found the perfect, historically correct pirate cutlass. And it's not this. Hi folks, Matt Easton here, Schola Gladiatoria and Easton Antique Arms. Now, I've made a number of videos over the years about pirate swords, so if you're particularly interested in piracy and swords and the weapons that they used, check out those past videos by searching in my back catalogue, essentially search for pirate, and you'll find some pretty detailed videos in there. Now, one of the points I've made over the years is that the kind of common idea of a cutlass is kind of incorrect for the Golden Age of Piracy. So what is often represented as a cutlass is actually something much later from the kind of Napoleonic period, the 18th century and into the 19th century. And this, of course, isn't correct for the Golden Age of Piracy. What is the Golden Age of Piracy? We usually say it's about 1650 through to about 1730. This is due to various historical factors, but this is, you know, the Golden Age. It's not to say that piracy, of course, has existed for hundreds, even thousands of years before that, and certainly piracy existed after that and still exists today in various forms. So the Golden Age of Piracy, so in other words, most of the movies or novels, books that are written about piracy are usually set in this period between 1650-ish and 1730-ish. And a lot of the most famous pirates actually are in the early 1700s, really, between about 1700 and about 1730, the typical kind of Pirates of the Caribbean style pirates. So the first thing to say before I finally show you what I've discovered, which I think might be one of the best qualifying swords I've ever owned, original antiques anyway, to qualify as a pirate cutlass, is that, of course, there wasn't a standard model of pirate sword. Pirates could absolutely have basket-hilted swords like this, and we know sometimes did, sometimes mentioned and shown in period art. Certain pirates might have preferred rapiers, like this Spanish example here, which would fall within the correct dates for the Golden Age of Piracy. Particularly, it's worth mentioning that different pirates from different ethnic or national kind of groups, nationalities, might prefer certain things to others. And indeed, there's social class here as well. So an officer an officer who was a Spanish pirate, 100% might be carrying this, but this wouldn't be the type of sword usually carried by a lower class Spanish pirate, or indeed a French pirate or an English pirate, okay, because it's a Spanish sword. Not impossible, but unlikely, statistically not likely. Do we know that, and here's another example, in fact, I'll just show another example. This is a broadsword, a kind of what's often called a Walloon broadsword. This is actually made for the Amsterdam Town Guard in around 1680. So again, this falls within absolutely the parameters of a period correct for the Golden Age of Piracy. We know these were carried in Amsterdam and made in huge numbers. Yes, it's possible that some of these could have ended up in the hands of Dutch pirates, for example, which of course the Dutch and the English and the Spanish and the Portuguese were famous seafaring people at this time and therefore produced a lot of pirates. And it's also worth mentioning that there are other types of sword from elsewhere in the world. There are, North African nimcha, for example, perhaps Indian talwar, Persian shamshir, Japanese katana wakizashi, Chinese dao and jian, that absolutely would have been in the hands of pirates who were operating in those areas, or perhaps in some cases were from those areas. Of course, there were lots of Japanese and Korean and North African and every other nationality of pirate around. But we know that certain nationalities, particularly the English and the French, and what became the Americans later, but obviously most Americans at that time were either Spanish, Portuguese, English or French, sometimes Dutch. They had a love, at least the common pirates had a love of a type of sword commonly called a cutlass by us today, in period often called related words such as couteau. Okay, now all of these words are related and are related to the French couteau, which means knife, and therefore by extrapolation probably some relationship to the Messer, or knife in German, the Langmesser. So absolutely these were swords which were seen as somewhere between a sword and a knife, essentially a big knife, usually single-edged, could be straight but often curved, and with various types of hilt which are appropriate to this period. So here it is. Without any further ado, I have found what I believe to be the best candidate for any historical sword I have yet owned to be a pirate cutlass from the correct period. And here it is. Okay, so what you're seeing, let's look at its features. It has a predominantly single-edged blade. It actually has a bit of a false edge up here, but it's basically a single-edged blade. It's not super short, it's not super broad. It is 29 inches long, which actually hilariously is, you know, a bit short for a European sword, but would be quite long for a Japanese sword, weirdly. So 29 inches would actually make quite a long katana. But anyway, so it's about a katana kind of curve and length, but of course it's a flexible European steel, sprung steel, so very different to a katana in that sense, but kind of has a slightly similar silhouette to a katana with an asymmetrical point up here, so the point is in line pretty much with the back, which is quite normal. It has a narrow fuller up the back. It has engraving on the blade, I'll show you that in a second. And then the hilt, now the hilt is what a lot of people will refer to as a walloon hilt. Now, technically speaking, this is probably German made, therefore not walloon, but also this would probably be more correctly described as a Felddegen, which really just means field sword. Okay, so it's not a specific, it doesn't have a specific name. Felddegen, you could call it, would be correct, but it's also somewhat vague. Also, it implies that it's, by calling it Felddegen, it's German. It probably is German, but there were other ones made in France and the Netherlands and other places. If it's from the Netherlands, you call it a walloon. But if it's from France, what do you call it? I don't know. It's a form of basket hilt. But notice, it is asymmetrical. So we essentially have two shells, a larger shell to protect the more projecting right of the hand, a smaller shell to protect the inside of the hand and the thumb. So two shells, these are made essentially by side rings. So what these evolved from are swords which have side rings, and then they filled the side rings to make them more protective, especially against thrusts. And these are separate plates which are sprung into place on many examples. Funnily enough, on this walloon example here, and this is very common with them, these are two large rings. I won't do it because it will wear it down. You can actually pop those plates out. If I push it with my thumb, it will spring out. So those are essentially little sprung plates that are compressed in there. The great advantage of that construction method, incidentally, is if that gets damaged, for example, if an opponent's sword blade sticks in it, or it gets squashed by a heavy blow, you can just replace it. You haven't broken the hilt, you just replace those little plates. It's quite a nice modular, quite modern way of thinking, actually. So we've got a similar arrangement here, two shells protecting the top. Then we have the most important part at the front is the knuckle bow coming down the middle, but then we have a guard at the outside. Now you'll notice that basket hilts usually have a bar on this side, but we don't have that on this side. Instead, we have a thumb ring, and we've talked about thumb rings in the past. They have a few different advantages. One is just retention of the weapon. It's more difficult to get the weapon out of my hand. It's less likely that I'm going to drop it. And potentially, if I want to use false edge cuts, a little bit like with putting your thumb on the flat of a blade, it gives you a point of leverage as well to do these kind of funky little false edge cuts. I'm not really sure that that was much done, but it has been noted that is an advantage. So we've got a side bar, a front bar, and then a little bar connecting the two, which just makes the whole guard a bit more strong, a bit more robust, and kind of gives an additional strut. If you didn't have that across there, it'd be easier for these bars to be smashed in. And then a fairly simple mushroom-ish shaped little pommel, pinned at the end, of course. This, I believe, is the original grip, actually, which you'll notice has very fine brass wire with flutes going down the sides, front and back. So, you know, nice to have that on there. The whole thing now is somewhat black. It looks like it's been painted at some time, and it does have on the, as well as the little holes, which make the guard a bit more attractive and make it slightly lighter, not very much. You have these little incised lines. I mentioned I'd show you the blade engraving. Let's just see if we can get that to focus here. There we go. So you'll see it has engraving all up the blade, so it's somewhat fancy, and it has it on both sides. You can maybe just about see some down there. It's a little bit faint because obviously, you know, this sword dates to about 1700 or 1700, 1720, I'd say probably. So here we have absolutely something that in the nomenclature of the time would have been described as a cutlass or a hanger or a cutto. Sometimes these were referred to as falchions, actually. We find that in English sources. And in fact, you can find swords very similar to this in Miller's treatise. It's sort of a treatise, but anyway, it shows combat with various weapons. And these are referred to as falchions and that. And that dates to the early 1700s. Can't remember the exact date, about 1710, I think. So that is the sort of date of this sort of thing. This is probably German made, probably for export, could have been used anywhere in Europe or the Americas or the Caribbean or somewhere like that. And it meets all of the criteria of a pirate cutlass. From the Golden Age of Piracy, from the time of people like Anne Bonny and Jack Rackham and Blackbeard and these people. So there we go, the real pirate cutlass. If you've ever wondered what a pirate cutlass from the time of those aforementioned famous pirates might have looked like, this is exactly what a cutlass of that time could look like. And really it's the first one I've had through my business and through my collection where I could actually show and go, this could have been, probably wasn't, but could have been a pirate cutlass in the Golden Age of Piracy at the time of Anne Bonny and Blackbeard and all of those sorts of people. Treasure Island, basically. So there we go, pirate cutlass. That's what it looks like, folks. Not like later 19th century cutlasses. But remember, my big caveat at the end, pirates also carried other types of sword as well, but this was probably, as far as we can tell from the period sources, the most popular type of sword for common sailors, common pirates to have, at least if they were of European origin. Hope that's been interesting. Hope I'll see you back on the channel really soon. Of course I have been Matt Easton and will continue to be, and I hope that I will see you back here really soon. Take care, folks. Thanks for watching. We've got extra videos on Patreon. Please give our Facebook a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Cheers, folks.